Welcome to the Period Story Podcast, the podcast where we get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods. We chat with women about their period story, their first period, their journey ever since, and we open up a conversation to help break taboos and stigmas around menstruation. I'm your host, Lanice Brothers. I'm a yoga teacher and registered nutritionist specializing in women's health, hormones, and the menstrual cycle. I'm also the author of You Can Have a Better Period, the book Publishers Weekly calls an empowering debut, an informative, refreshing take on women's health. It's available from Amazon, Bookshop, and anywhere else you purchase books. We have reached the end of season 6 of Period Story, and I'm so thrilled to share today's conversation. I'm speaking with Claire Baker, who is a period coach, speaker, and author of the book 50 Things You Need to Know About Periods. Claire is such a force in the menstrual health community, spreading the message that having a menstrual cycle can be a beautiful thing that can help you get to know yourself better. Please enjoy today's episode. I'm really excited to have you here and hear about the story of your very first period.
Thanks for asking me to come and share, Lanice. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, let's get into it. So can you tell us the story of your very first period?
I don't remember my very first period at all, actually. I'm curious how many people you've spoken to who don't remember theirs.
It's, I think maybe I've interviewed about 50, 60 people and maybe one or two haven't remembered.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't remember mine at all. And I have really tried. But I don't. And, there's lots of, that's not the end of the conversation. Obviously, there's so much we can talk about around that. And that's where I've spent most of the work that I've done to explore my menarche self has been really important to me. So journeying with her and, who I was when I started bleeding, the kinds of things that I was into and the things that information I was taking in and absorbing about my body and my, period, all of those things I've spent lots of time with, which I'm excited to share more on. But when it comes to the actual first time I bled, there's just nothing at all. Okay.
That's so interesting that you can't remember that, because for some people I've spoken to, that's like a really formative, that very, very first time is very, very formative and interesting for you because this is the work that you do, that, it's those early years that you've explored, but the very first time there's just a blank. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit more about the early years of having a period?
Yeah, I can. So I remember the things I do know was that I started developing in terms of getting little lumps where my breasts would be much earlier than a lot of my friends. I was probably 10. And so I remember my mum saying to me, "Oh, you're going to get your period soon. You're going to get your period soon." And I was like, "Oh, God, okay, this is going to happen soon." And it just didn't happen. And I do remember waiting for it and wondering where it was, and other friends of mine not having getting there, and me, I was still waiting for it and kind of willing it to come. And mum kept asking me, I kind of felt this pressure, this oh, when is this going to happen? So I know that I was about 14 or 15 because I remember that not having it. That's how I know that, I remember it hadn't happened. And the very first few periods that I had when it did finally begin, I say finally, it was a total normal age to get it. There'd just been this pressure for 5 years because I'd been told that it was going to happen and then it didn't. So I was, it was just external and internal expectation. But I remember I didn't tell anyone. I definitely know that. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't really tell any of my friends. I just kept it to myself and just managed it alone. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I do remember trying to flush a pad down the toilet because I had no idea how to dispose of that. I remember stealing tampons out of my mum. She had this little black ornamental box in the bathroom where she kept her tampons, and I remember taking them out of there and, again, just having no idea how to use them. So I had inserted this tampon. I was doing a triathlon one day with a friend of mine, and I had inserted this tampon just so it was essentially hanging out of my vagina. Like, you could see the like top of the tampon hanging out. And I remember riding this bike just thinking, like, this is horrible. How does anyone do this? Like, how do people have their period and go about their life in so much pain? Because I had no idea how to insert. So I just had no idea what I was doing. And we're trying to read the instructions on packets and just like fumbling my way through. I had no pain at all. I remember some friends of mine had pain or would get headaches, and I had none of that. I do remember that my periods came quite regularly, and I would mark out on my calendar with a star, like when I would expect the next one to come. And so I started like intuitively tracking them quite early, but I don't have any, beyond just not really knowing what I was doing. They didn't like cause me any pain or anything like that early on.
What's really interesting is that you said quite early on, so when you were around 10, your mom said, oh, you're going to get your period soon. And then when you got your period, you didn't tell anyone. So can you talk a little bit more about why you kept it a secret?
Yeah, I was totally rebelling against this like invasion of privacy that I felt like I was constantly experiencing. And, my mum and I have discussed this. I just grew up in a household where there was no boundaries. And it was like people would walk in on each other in the shower or, just comment on each other's bodies. And I was the eldest of 5. And so I remember the like awkwardness of it changing from being really natural for me and my siblings to be naked around each other and take baths together to then suddenly like, oh, I've got like pubic hair and my breasts are changing and I don't feel comfortable being naked around my family anymore. And I don't like my mum just walking in on me when I'm having a shower and commenting about my breasts and telling me when my period's coming. And I remember one time I knew that she'd been checking my underwear to see if, I'd started bleeding yet. And I just remember, I can still feel it, just this like protectiveness, like this self-protection of like, no, you don't, stop commenting on what's happening and stop telling me what's going to happen. And so I feel like it was me claiming my experience and a sense of sovereignty in amidst all of these changes and everyone telling me what was going on, and just like, no, I'm going to take care of this on my own. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just going to like forge ahead by myself.
So when you got your period, you kept it a secret, but am I right in assuming that you knew what it was and what was going to happen because your mom had kind of had those conversations with you early on?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I have lots of parents who ask me how to best approach these conversations with children. And I, of course, think that being open and honest is the best pathway forward. I think my mum, couldn't have done anything differently. Maybe she could have given me a little bit more space, but she was so open with me about having a period, about her own period, about what to expect. Like, she's a nurse and we knew all of the like correct anatomical terms from a really young age. We were never allowed to say things like willy or fanny. It was like a penis and testicles and vagina and vulva. Like, I knew the difference between all of these like anatomical parts of myself really from a really young age. So I was definitely educated and informed about menstruation. I just didn't want my experience to be imposed upon in any way. It felt like, and I don't know the answer to how somebody manages that delicate balance, but how to share, information without merging with somebody's experience, I suppose, which is how it felt for me. It was like so much that it kind of like I recoiled.
Yeah. It is interesting though, because when it comes to periods and pregnancy and birth, people are so willing to share their bad stories, their bad birth stories, their bad period stories. And that protectiveness you felt is so interesting, where you kind of just wanted to have this experience for yourself. Obviously, there are other reasons, as you've explained, but I'm curious, how did you kind of expand your knowledge about what was happening in your body beyond this kind of intuitive need to track your cycle?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I do remember learning at school. I remember all of the girls in the classroom being ushered into a separate room, and we were shown pads and tampons and told how much blood to expect. And I do remember being taught how to manage your period, essentially. And so I knew to take the tampons from mum's bathroom. I knew how to go and buy pads. And I remember just poring over the labels. I had a couple of books that I remember seeking out in the library, or that I had been given, about these sorts of changes that might happen, and reading magazines. You'd learn different things from teen magazines, but it wasn't something my friends and I ever spoke about. It was very much a solitary mission to discover, as what I needed to know. But then I started taking hormonal contraception probably about 18 months into having a period. So I then just skipped my period for a lot of the next 10 years. I would have it a few times a year, a withdrawal bleed, but I chose not to, mostly for that next time. So really it was only maybe 18 months, maybe maximum 2 years of actually bleeding and having a natural menstrual cycle before kind of opting out of it.
Wow. So can you just talk us through a little bit, if you feel comfortable, about why you went on hormonal contraception and whether or not your mom was involved in this decision at all?
So I started taking the oral contraceptive pill purely because of hormonal acne. So I had experienced mild to severe acne from about 13 or 14 years old. So before my periods actually began, until, I was about 16, and there'd been, lots of visits to the dermatologist for different creams and antibiotics. And I'd taken a few different things that might have worked for a short period of time, like lots of different skincare, just this topical ointments. And it was just, for me, having acne was so hard. I found that to be a really difficult part of being a teenager. It was something that I was conscious of every single day, from the second I'd wake up, the pain of it, just the feeling of it on my skin, being conscious of what people at school thought, the daily process of trying to cover it up with makeup, and it was just awful. I honestly would have done anything to get rid of it. And so I tried, after a number of different, like I said, different medications and topical treatments. My dermatologist suggested the pill, and it was incredible. It just worked. I mean, not instantly, it took a couple of months, but it worked, and it continued to work. And that was my number one reason. It was another number of years before I started having sex, which was then just a bonus that I didn't have to think about any other contraception besides, of course, protecting for STIs. But in terms of pregnancy, it just felt like an added extra of being on the pill. Mum was, absolutely involved in that decision, and she walked me through that process. I remember her reservations, and I remember over the years that I took the pill, she would often say to me, you're still taking it. Do you think maybe you should have a break? She had taken it when she was younger and had some issues with it. And I think she was just cautious of me taking it, and would often say, maybe it's time to have a break. And I know now she does have I would say probably regrets. I think as every parent probably looks back on some decisions that they made, that is one she has shared with me, that she does think, oh, I wish I had have maybe considered that more before letting, me take it at such a young age.
Mm. So I remember when we were on the panel for the business of birth control, you said that coming off the pill was like you were seeing everything in black and white, and then suddenly everything was in technicolor. That really stuck with me because it was just such a visceral way of describing it. So how long were you on the pill? Did you say 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 10 years. And so then what made you decide to come off of it?
Yes, I almost look at that first period coming off the pill as like a second menarche, because it was so significant that, and as I said, I don't remember my first period. So that moment was really quite something. I decided to come off hormonal contraception because it had just for a while stopped feeling like it was in alignment with my own health values. And I had at times attempted to come off it. And every time I did, my skin would just go crazy again and would break out. And I was like, ugh, just don't want that. So, and I remember I was talking to my GP about it. And I remember him saying, like, as women, because I tried Roaccutane, which is a really strong medication for acne, and again, it hadn't worked. And I remember him saying to me, like, your acne is hormonal, and so no matter how strong the medication, it's not going to work. The pill's the only thing that's going to work for you and your skin, because it can essentially shut down the hormones that are causing this problem. So yeah, that just really kept me on it for a long time. And then I was about 25, 26, and I was making some big changes in my life overall. I was reconsidering the work that I was doing, and I'd begun practicing yoga, and, I wasn't drinking so much anymore, and making, really I'd always paid attention to my diet, but just really learning more about nutrition and looking at, doing a full audit of all the chemicals in my home, and just taking more care of what I was putting into my body. And, just started to feel strange that I was taking this little pill every day when I was making so much effort to not expose myself to unnecessary chemicals. So I think that was really, I was like, okay, this doesn't quite feel right anymore. And I'd really been working on my gut health, and it was incredible. I stopped taking it, and I was so worried that my skin was going to break out again. And it didn't, it was totally fine. But what did happen was that I didn't bleed for a year. So I had one full year of post-pill amenorrhea, which also coincided with probably the most stressful year of my life due to a personal event. And so it's funny looking back, I'm like, was it the pill, or was it the stress, or was it both? But there was the one full year of not bleeding at all. And that really catapulted me into the work that I do now, because I was suddenly aware of how little I actually knew about my body and about ovulation and about, my hormonal cycle. And so I'm grateful for that year. But it was scary to not bleed for that entire time, and to not know what effect the pill had on my system and whether my period would come back. And like I said, when it did, it was a really significant moment.
How soon were you expecting your period to come back after you came off the pill?
I expected it would take a few months, I think. I was from what I had read, I thought, yeah, I guess it'll probably come back within a few months. And I was seeing an acupuncturist at the time who'd said to me, if it gets to 6 months, maybe then you might need to, we need to look at what's going on. And it got to 6 months. And so I then went and had various ultrasounds where I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. I'm still not convinced that I actually had it, but they gave me that diagnosis as an explanation for not having my period. And then I remember, again, this acupuncturist saying, okay, if it gets to 9 months, we might need to do some more investigations. So I had blood tests. I was, kind of getting things checked out throughout the year. And I remember saying, all right, if it gets to 12 months, maybe you might need to chat to your doctor about it's metmorphin, the drug that can stimulate ovulation. And it's I really don't want to do that. And it was interesting because it got to nearly to 12 months, and I had been so it reminded me almost of that first period of everyone being right, it'll come at this time, and I was so tightly wound, when is it going to come back? It was that same feeling, and I really remember letting go of it. I was going into a new year, and I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to let this go, and I just have to trust my body that it's doing what it needs to do. My skin hasn't broken out. I have lots of energy. I feel good. I'm sleeping well. All other signs point to the fact that I'm well. It's been a really big and stressful, unexpectedly stressful year. I'm just going to take the pressure off. And then I think, it was a few weeks after that I began to bleed. And so I feel like that's just the lesson of my life, to be honest. It's let it go.
And what was that experience of what you call the second menarche like?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was so exciting. I'll never forget it. Waking up, seeing that that blood in my underwear. I'm like, oh God, is this it? It's actually happening. And I texted my acupuncturist right away because, she was really on the journey with me by this point. I'm like, oh my God, I think it's starting. And she was like, okay, just get up and go for a really gentle walk to just kind of get everything moving. I was like, okay. So I went for a gentle walk, and it started to bleed more over the day. And then it was just excruciating pain. It was so full on. I actually vomited. I was vomiting from the pain, which I've never done since, but it was really, really full on. And I'd say the first few were like that. They were pretty intense experiences. So on one hand, I was, thrilled and celebrating and really excited and relieved, and also in quite a lot of physiological pain.
And what did you do about the pain?
At the time, I think I just took some pain medication. I was like, okay, whatever I need to do right now to just get through this. This is really full on. But I was still seeing this acupuncturist. I was, still really committed to doing the things that I had been doing for that 12 months to try to get my body back into a place where it was able to ovulate again. And so, that included stress management and sleeping and eating well and not over exercising, things like that, which, lots of warmth, in my body, warming food. And it's been 10 years since then. Those things still, I know that if I let some of those things slip for a bit, that pain will come back. That has been my experience, that if I have had a really couple of stressful months, or having more alcohol or coffee that I know my system really likes, then my body's not backwards and coming forward. It will tell me.
I'm actually the same way. I suspect that I have mild endometriosis, and I have a lot of things that I do to keep everything in check. And if I let anything slip, it will come roaring back, the pain. And it's interesting because when you talk about, and we'll talk about, get into your work in a second, but when you talk about, things understanding your menstrual cycle, you use the hashtag adore your cycle. And there's this expectation that, you will always have a great menstrual cycle and a great period. And I'm really glad that you're being so honest in what you do and how you manage it, because it's not as simple as you take a few pills and then presto, no more pain and, no more mood changes and all of that. So can you talk more about the journey that you went on from getting your period back, managing having a period as an adult to then getting into the work that you do today?
Yeah, it was incredibly intertwined. I, at that point, had already started working with women as a health coach and had trained and was seeing clients. I was still very much in the early days. And so as I was learning more about fertility and ovulation and my hormones and, tracking my period, I was, I guess, sharing quite organically this information as well with clients, or sharing resources, books that I was reading, teachers that I was learning from. And it quite, like, early on, it became an aspect of my work, in the sense that I just didn't quite understand why in my own certification as a health coach, there had been no mention of the impact that having a menstrual cycle might have on your health and on the way that you feel, and your self-care and nutrition, and how movement might change. Like, everything I was taught was very holistic. Like, it was a very holistic training, but then it was also incredibly linear and really didn't include like the female body's experience at all. And so I was just quite curious how, like I said, it went from, for me, like black and white to technicolor. So I was like, well, this is like pretty full on, going from being in a very linear state for 10 years to suddenly having this very cyclical experience. Like, well, if it's affecting my choices around how I care for myself, when I rest, when I'm sleeping more, how strong I feel at different times in the month, the fluctuations in my libido, like naturally my motivation, I was like, God, it's affecting so many things. Naturally, this would also, surely this is affecting the clients I'm working with. And I was just really curious at the beginning. I was like, do you notice this as well? Like, how can we sit here and have a conversation about your motivation or your energy levels or your self-care without talking about this? So I just started to encourage my clients to just track their cycle and just take what they were noticing about how they felt at different phases into, in bringing it into our sessions. So that was always like an aspect of my work. And then I would say a few years in, I just became, more and more connected to my own cycle. I did a few more trainings and was more educated on what was actually happening in the body. And I felt like, yeah, actually this is where I would like to center my work now. It's been an aspect for a number of years, but now actually I really want to own and be more vocal about how important I think this is. It was I was terrified to do that. I really didn't want to do that. I felt like I didn't really know anyone else at the time who was calling themselves like a menstrual cycle coach or period coach or whatever. And I didn't really want to be known as that person. I was like, oh, I'm kind of happy to just be a women's health coach who talks about this stuff, but I don't really want that to be the central focus of my work. And I had so much resistance to it. And then I remember really making the decision. I was like, no, this is so important to me. I really do want to center this more. And it was just extraordinary when I did that. And I created a series of workshops and my first ebook on the topic that was in 2016, and brought everything that I had been learning and again, like kind of behind the scenes with clients for a number of years to the like front of my business. And the response was just incredible. Like, people were so open to it and supportive and welcoming. And for anyone who was like, ugh, I don't want to hear you talk about periods all the time. Like, I want you to go back to when you were just talking about like self-care. Like, well, that's fine. You can go and you can leave. You don't have to be a part of this conversation anymore. But it's always been like, my work is, yes, it is about a menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle awareness and charting and getting to know your own body. But all of those other aspects are like, they're all there too. Like, my work has never been about helping people necessarily with like period pain per se. Like, I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe. That's not what I do. It's always stayed in the like full like spectrum experience of somebody's life, whether that's their creativity, their relationships, their health, their spiritual practice. Like, I really believe that if you have a menstrual cycle, I'm interested in like hanging out at the intersection between all of those things and how you ultimately show up to your life in each separate phase. So it's less about like, definitely it's not medical, and it's definitely less about supporting. I guess it's less about supporting people through I refer on a lot, like I refer to other practitioners whose skills are in, aiding supplementation, for example, or really, supporting someone like you do through the, the nutritional aspect of dealing with, more severe menstrual issues. I'm really interested in who are you, in each phase of your cycle, and how can I support you to really show up to your life as the full spectrum version of yourself in every phase, because we do change and fluctuate. And I think that that's really beautiful. And I want people to know that having a menstrual cycle, it's a gift and it can be your ally. And yeah, I say, like, you said, #adore your cycle. That definitely doesn't mean every period is a dream and it's like rainbows and unicorns all of the time. Like, we get into lots of shadow work and looking at our vulnerabilities and our sensitivities. But I love that. Like, I love the light and the dark lens that it offers us to really be like who we actually are, and owning those darker sides of ourselves that come out at different times in the cycle, and exploring that, not just like medicating it or labeling it and hiding it away. So yeah, that's how I got to where I am.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting hearing you express the reticence you had about calling yourself a period coach or menstrual cycle coach, and even not kind of going deeper into this space, given what you do today and how deep you are into this work. And I'm curious, what do you say to people who say, well, actually, like, do we even need a period? Do we even need a menstrual cycle?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I came across an article just recently, actually. I think it was a Cosmo piece about how we don't need to have a period and how you can skip it and just not have one. And hey, like I said at the very beginning, I chose to have very few periods over, an entire 10 years of my life, an entire decade. So I get it, because sometimes it is incredibly inconvenient when we live in the world that we live in. It can be painful for some people. Some people genuinely really, really struggle, like physically and psychologically. Our world is not set up for people who menstruate at all. And there's such a lack of support and resources. It's expensive as well. It costs money, every time you bleed. So I really understand, and I have such a non-judgmental lens through which I see anyone who chooses to take, oral contraceptive pill for lots of different reasons, including not having a period. But I believe in its power to bring groundedness to our lives, to bring a sense of self-authority through self-knowledge, and really embracing our nature as it is. Like, when we embrace and accept who we are, it creates so much ease in our life, and there's such a sense of belonging. And anytime we as humans try to be anything other than what we actually are, our true nature, it just causes pain and suffering. And I truly believe, and have seen this through the lives of so many of my clients, that when we really just accept our nature and learn to live in greater harmony with it, there is a real magic that occurs in people's lives. And it doesn't happen overnight, but there is something that I think we lose when we suppress who we are. And by suppressing our biological and physiological function of the menstrual cycle, it's suppressing a really large part of who we are. And that's not even getting into the actual chemical changes in the body and how that actually affects, the different hormones and the different systems. It's a ripple effect. The menstrual cycle doesn't live in isolation from everything else that's connected to other parts of our system. But I'm really looking at it through the lens of who we are as humans, and our capacity for creativity and to connect with other people and to be ourselves in the world. I think I do actually think that we are denying ourselves, a part of life, of not knowing this cyclical aspect of us. It's like we're like the seasons, we're like the moon, like we do change, and it is hard because that's not what society doesn't make it easy to be like that. Like we're like circles trying to fit into a square hole. But yeah, there's a real depth and a lot to discover, I think, about yourself by getting to know who you are across your menstrual cycle. It's very beautiful and painful. That's life.
So someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, really interesting. I'm thinking about coming off hormonal contraception, or I've just come off, or I'm just really interested in the idea of charting and tracking my cycle, but I have no idea where to start. What would you say?
Well, you can start today. That's the best bit. You don't have to wait. My approach is really about getting to know your own cycle. So it's useful, of course, to learn about the different hormonal phases and how estrogen and progesterone and their fluctuations can, impact on how you feel across the month. Those things are useful. But my approach is definitely about getting to know your own body and your own experience. And so I would suggest starting today and then every day moving forward, finding a method of charting that works for you. So some people love apps like the Clue app or various other apps. Some people really love pen to paper, and that's an approach that I also love. So if you're someone who journals, you can just start by adding what day of your cycle you're on next to the date, and to figure out which day you're on, you simply look back to when you had your last period, and the first day of bleeding, full flow bleeding, is the first day of your cycle, and you just count forward from there. So for example, you might be day 16 today, and you can use a chart. I have some free charts available on my website, and you just start paying attention every day. Like, how is your physical body today? How is your energy levels? Any like cravings for particular food? Mentally, what's going on in your mind? Is there, are you noticing a difference in focus or any like the quantity or quality of thoughts? Emotionally, how are you feeling? And then, spiritually is something I encourage people to do too. To like, how connected do you feel to yourself or to nature or to the world around you? You can also think creatively, sexually. There's so many different aspects of ourselves we can bring to a charting practice, but it can just be a few words. Today I feel energized, a bit like maybe a little bit anxious or nervous mentally, and spiritually feeling quite connected to myself, and just simply start to notice, like, today I slept more. I had trouble sleeping last night. Today I feel really connected to my partner. Today I feel really frustrated with work. And these, like, over about 3 months, I notice it takes to begin to start to recognize these patterns. Oh, right. So on like day 20, I seem to always want to like quit my job and like run away to another country. And that's when like I notice a lot of self-doubt or inner critique attacks happening. Okay, cool. That's really good for me to know. That's gold. And then on cycle day 5, I notice, there's this sort of like desire to want to reconnect with people again, but I'm also feeling like still quite introverted. So that's an interesting inner conflict to begin to look at. And these patterns will start to emerge. But it takes time, and it takes a daily commitment, because I found that charting in retrospect doesn't really work. It has to be just like a noticing and just a mindful practice each day to see where you are and documenting it down somewhere. And then after about 3 months, just beginning to look for those patterns.
It's so interesting when you talk to people, and there can be a real resistance to going deep, because we're so attuned to the external. And then asking people to tune into what's happening in their bodies can be hard for some people, because they're not used to slowing down and thinking, well, actually, what do I really feel? What am I really thinking about this? Because, there's so many distractions in the world. So it's so interesting, the approach that you've taken, and also to hear your own approach that you use pen and paper, which I find really interesting. So can you just tell us a little bit more about Do you have a journal? Do you have like a calendar? Like how do you actually do it?
Yeah, I'm so old school. Like the less time I spend on technology, the better. Yeah, I have a journal first and foremost for me. But I think what's important to note there is that the best method of charting is the one that you'll actually do, and one that suits you and that can easily like fit into habits that you already have. So if you're someone who, you know that you're going to use an app on your phone because you've already got a number of things you check in with there every day, then brilliant. I love journaling and always have. So it just makes sense for me to, like I said, just start to add that cycle day next to the date. And usually before I begin a journal entry, I'll just make a couple of like really simple notes. So, if I'm bleeding, I'll write down like how much I'm bleeding, what I'm noticing physically in my body, how I'm feeling. And, where I am today, I'm cycle day 10. I'm noticing, changes in cervical mucus. All of my fertility charting, which is separate to menstrual cycle awareness, actually does go into an app. I use Kindara for all of my fertility charting. But for menstrual cycle awareness, which is more about, like the whole holistic human experience, I just made a couple of notes of thoughts that I'm having, like how I'm feeling that day. And I'll usually flick back, like, okay, cool. So I'm cycle day 10 today. How did I feel on cycle day 10 last cycle? How about the one before that? And how about the one before that? And, these things start to emerge. Another method, if people are listening who like pen to paper, is by just getting a notebook that you dedicate to this practice and dividing each page into 4. And then say the first page is 4 lots of cycle day 1, second page is cycle day 2. So you just fill in one quadrant for 4 different cycles, so that by the time you finish 4 cycles, you've got a whole page with notes from that cycle day. So you'll be able to see, okay, on cycle day 10, on these 4 cycles, this is how I felt. And that's quite a simple way to just begin to pay attention to these patterns. But I do have charts that I don't use so much anymore. At the very beginning of my journey, when I was learning about this, I used them, and they're circular charts. I've got a couple that you can download for free, and they show one whole cycle on one page. And again, there's just a small space for a couple of notes, things that you're observing. You can also chart where the moon is at and notice what, phase of your cycle you're in, if that's interesting to you. Dreams is another good thing to write down, how you notice your dreams change. And then that way, once you complete one full chart, it's just on one page. And it's nice, once you start beginning collecting these charts, then you can, again, go back and look at these patterns. I also find it interesting with handwriting to see how handwriting changes. So often when I'm looking at a client's chart, I'll notice when they're writing really neatly and they've taken their time, or when they've just like scribbled something down, or when they've like left whole days, like whole sections blank, because that's really interesting. Like that has a lot of information just in, the way that we've documented, like when we've been more diligent and we've really practiced like that mindfulness, or when we've just been like, whatever, and that's an interesting observation in and of itself. So I find handwriting to be quite revealing in that way. And I just love the practice of connecting and taking that time to be off my phone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember once I was with a client, and when I see my clients, I have a notebook and I take notes, and she was quite surprised that I was writing everything down. And, she was like, doesn't your hand hurt? And she was saying how she just doesn't write at all. But I really like that practice of like just seeing something really tangible, and of course being off my phone. I'm curious, what's the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself when you started tracking your menstrual cycle?
Yeah, gosh, there's been a few. I mean, it's been, from something as practical, it's been so many, practical as like, oh, coffee doesn't actually really work for me, like I always used to think, oh, I'm a big coffee drinker, I love coffee. And then I realized from charting, I'm like, actually. I'm noticing on the days that I have it, I'm actually like really anxious. And for a while, I thought it was just at different points in my cycle I could metabolize it better. And I experimented with that for a while, but then I had to kind of come to the sad conclusion that I just don't think it really works for me. So that's been, you know, things like that, like, okay, like when different things work for me at different times. And that can, you know, be anything from exercise to food to different kinds of socializing. But it was through charting my menstrual cycle that I realized that I had symptoms of hypothyroidism, and so then led to a diagnosis of Hashimoto's, and that came entirely through noticing changes in my menstrual cycle and what was happening, which was incredible because that was great data to be able to take to my GP to then get the necessary tests that I had to get done to receive that diagnosis, and has continued to be my you know, rather than getting blood tests every month, you know, I get those regularly too, but I know what to look for in my own cycle to be able to read my body and listen to say, like, how is everything going? Like, is everything humming along now? And, you know, those symptoms have alleviated, and that's been incredible to have that feedback every month about my health. And there's also been things like leaving my last relationship. I, you know, cycle after cycle after cycle was journaling on how unhappy I was and how I just didn't want to be in that relationship whenever I was in the premenstruum, the week before bleeding. And it's like that's the time in my cycle when that truth, you know, really rings true for me, and I can see things more clearly and what's actually going on in my life. And I really believe in listening to that. So it is also, you know, menstrual cycle awareness has supported me to make some very big decisions, like, really, you know, where do I live, relationships, work. You know, it's really supported me through making great work decisions by taking time when I bleed to just like rest and let those answers come and take time away. So it's taught me how to respect the creative cycle and how to listen to my intuition and my body in a way that I don't know if any other, like, I'm such a type A, like, I'm so inherently ambitious. I don't know if any other practice really could have like got through to me in the way that learning to listen to my menstrual cycle has.
So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I really want to learn more about this, I really want to work with Claire, where can they find you? And can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do?
Mm-hmm. So you can learn more. The first place to go would be to my website, which is clairebaker.com, CLAIREBAKER.com. And my classroom at the moment is the best place to go to learn more. And I've got courses that teach you how to journal your cycle. So the process that I described about, you know, beginning to bring menstrual cycle awareness into your journaling practice, that's a course that I've created called Flow that people can learn how to do that. I've then got more courses that explore the creative aspect of the menstrual cycle, identifying, you know, when you feel most creative. I've got ones on self-care, and they're the best places to start, definitely. I also offer one-on-one coaching services and teach workshops and circles throughout the year too, and that information is all there as well. But I would usually recommend somebody starts by taking a course and beginning to learn how to you know, practice menstrual cycle awareness. And then when we begin to actually do some one-on-one work together, it's fun, and because there's lots of juicy data to work with, and we can go a bit deeper together then. Amazing.
If you wanted to leave listeners with one last thought from all the amazing things that you've shared today, what would that be?
That it doesn't have to, you know, having a menstrual cycle really doesn't have to be a burden in our lives at all. You know, like I said, I'm not bypassing the shadowy aspects and the pain that it can bring. I would never, ever do that. But there is a lot of beauty and magic as well to be found in being in a body that bleeds and living in greater congruence with our cyclical rhythm. It's a quite extraordinary experience to have in this lifetime. So I would just encourage people to, you know, invite that possibility in.
Amazing. I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. All the links will be in the show notes, including links to Claire's website. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Oh, it's been really fun. Thanks for asking such great questions. I love this project.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenise Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.